quite 50%, but it feels like it, and I haven't looked at who the other people are who might be MPs. That the only other point I would like to make is to go back to what Chris has said, and that I think that maybe the parliamentarians don't all turn up as well. And if that is the case, then maybe having a councillor who would turn up would make a difference. And that's why I hope that conference will vote for the amendment.
Thank you very much, Michael. The online voting is now open for those of you at home. For those of you in the hall, I'm going to ask you please to firstly be seated if you wish to vote, and secondly, if you are in favour of this constitutional amendment, please raise your passes now. Thank you very much. And if you are not in favour of this constitutional amendment, please raise your passes now. Okay. I apologise once more, Michael. I do not think you got a two-thirds majority there in any way at all. I'm very sorry. We have finished a little bit early. I was oversubscribed for the first half of that, but I did call everybody who put in a card for the second part of it. I would like to pass on to Cara Jenkinson to chair the next session, and thank you very much for your time this afternoon, conference. I hope you enjoyed the Michael Berwick-Gooding show.
Good afternoon, conference. We'll just wait a few seconds for people to join the session, and then we'll begin. while we're waiting, a reminder that the emergency motion selected was the one in relation to restoration of the international development aid budget. That will take place at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So speakers welcome. And also for the animal welfare debate, we'd love to have some more speakers in for that, so do submit a card. Okay, so welcome to F13, the Leaders Q&A session. I'm Cara Jenkinson, and I'll be putting your questions to Sir Ed. Just to say, for those of you that went to Autumn Conference, you'll notice that we don't have Carolyn Quinn here, so you'll have to make do with me. But we have some fantastic questions from you all. If I call your question, if I read out your question, do make your way to the intervention mic in case you want to ask a supplementary. Thank you, Jenny. Without any further ado, I would like to call the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Who of you remembers Bucks Fizz? They were great. We used to win Eurovision Song Contest both back in those days. Anyway, Cara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Okay, so start with our first question, which is from Sarah Dobson. With Kemi Badenoch abandoning the Tories' commitment to net zero, how can we make the most of the opportunity to win over Conservative voters who care about climate change?
Well, thank you, Sarah. Isn't it interesting how the right of British politics are behaving on climate change? You've got Farage and Reform, who deny it's even happening, despite all the science and all the worrying evidence around our world. And now you've got Kemi Badenoch. Now, to be fair to her, she's not saying, Sarah, that it's not happening. It says it's all too difficult to sort it out by 2050. Now, that is just defeatism. And that's, I'm afraid, the Conservative Party are not prepared to have that ambition to get this done when it is so important, existential to our world. And, you know, I would refer the Conservatives back to when Liberal Democrats were running climate change policy, when we showed what could be done, didn't we? You know, we made Britain the world leader in offshore wind. We negotiated Europe to have really ambitious climate change targets and meet them. But in the last 10 years, the Conservatives have frankly done very little. And that's one of the reasons why, yes, it's going to be challenging because of the Tories' failure, but we should still have the ambition to do it. And you know in your communities, in your council areas, that so much more can be done. And part of our job is to hold the Labour government to account. Because they promised a lot, didn't they, before the election, and we're not hearing anywhere near enough of it. So tackling climate change, which is so dear to Liberal Democrats' hearts, given our commitment to the environment, we will continue to campaign on it. We believe it is possible to hit those net zero targets by 2050 or even earlier if we have the right policies. And here's the thing just to remember, and I'll end on this. You know, people said that offshore wind would always be incredibly expensive. And they said, don't do it. Now it's one of the cheapest forms of power generation, cheaper than fossil fuel. So let's tell people, going green, sorting out climate change is good for your pocket too.
Thank you very much, Ed. Talking about Labour, next question. Will you stand up for disabled people in the face of Labour's cruel benefits cuts and the media's lazy stereotypes?
Yes. We will all stand up, won't we? It's just so wrong. Targeting the sick and the disabled, people who can't work, who will never work. you've seen people in your constituencies. I've seen many people in my advice surgeries over the years who've, had their benefits taken away from them in past attempts to try to make people work who can't. I remember one gentleman, he came into my office on crutches, and he said, they've taken my PIP away, and I can't work. And I said, how could they do that? I mean, you clearly can't work. You're really struggling just to walk into my office. And he said, well, yeah, I'm quite a proud person. And when I went for my assessment, I left my crutches in the car. And I struggled and got into the office to be assessed. And they failed me. And that is how unfair some of these systems can be. People are trying to be proud to say what they can do, and then they fail people, even though it's obvious from the medical reports, from what people can see in front of them. And so I am really worried, and we must stand up. But here's one point which I think we need to push back. Of course, there are lots of people who would like to work, who can work, who want to work. And we should be enabling. And, if there's special equipment required, if there's training, if there's health treatment, cut those health waiting lists, if there's other things that can be done. A while back, I had organised with people in my local area a conference with employers about people who have various forms of neurodiversity. And, many people with neurodiversity are the most fantastic employees. So brilliant, can give so much. And yet, the process of hiring and recruiting often discriminates against them because, they have problems engaging with the interviewer. Maybe even don't get past the shortlisting stage. Now, surely that's wasting all that talent. So, of course, we want to support and enable people into work. And I'm sure whether it's people with caring responsibilities, so many people you can think of, let's help them into work. That's good for them, good for their families, and good for our economy. But I'm not sure that's what the government's talking about. I'm really not sure about that. When I hear them talking about it, it looks like a smoke screen for cuts. We've seen this before. All stick and no carrot. And we will do our job speaking up for the vulnerable, the people who have no voice. That's who we are.
Thank you very much. And that was a question from Ian Jones, who I think isn't in the hall, so I won't be asking a supplementary. So the next question is on a related issue. It's a question from Janie Little. Wes Streeting has clearly deprioritised mental health within the NHS. What can we do to push it back up the agenda?
Well, thank you, Janie. First of all, I'd like to say I'm really proud of those Liberal Democrats who've campaigned so effectively and done so much for people with mental health problems. And I particularly want to single out Norman Lamb. Many of you remember that Norman was a health spokesperson in the coalition, and what he did for destigmatising mental health, pushing laws to make sure that the NHS was supposed to see mental health on a parity with physical health, were really groundbreaking at the time. He did so many experiments. And it feels since 2015 we've just not taken that forward. There's been no real advance. And now we see Wes Streeting saying things and doing things they didn't say before the general election. I don't know if you've noticed that disparity we're getting from them. Worse than that, they've actually, as I think Janie's referring to, they are reducing the priority given to mental health. They've taken away targets for the NHS to provide support, provide appointments for people with mental health conditions. And I just think that's outrageous. You'd expect that thing from the Conservatives, and we're getting it from Wes Streeting. And I'm afraid we need to make sure that Labour Party members, councillors and MPs feel really, really bad about that, because they've got to change their ways, and it's us who are going to hold them to account. We're the only ones who will for people with mental health problems. And again, I want to, if I may, talk about examples in my constituency. And I do a lot of work with Sarah Olney and Munira Wilson on this, because our boundaries are closed in Kingston and Richmond for some of these services. And I'm particularly thinking of mental health services for children and adolescents. CAMS services are really, really suffering. They've been suffering for quite a while. And when you have parents in your advice surgery saying that their child has waited for 2 years or 3 years for appointment, it absolutely breaks your heart. And trying to get these organisations to do more, you know, even with people with good intentions, it is an uphill battle. And seeing what the government says is just we're going to go backwards. So we will do more, we will campaign, and I'm really proud that not only do we have a brilliant health team led by the amazing Helen Morgan, but we decided to appoint a spokesperson just on mental health, Danny Chambers, and he's doing a brilliant job for us.
Thank you very much. And I don't think Janie's there for a supplementary, so we'll move on to the next question, which relates to foreign policy. And it's a question from Michael Kilpatrick, who asks, will you state categorically, when referring to peace or ceasefires, that you mean that the only acceptable outcome is the complete withdrawal of Russia from Ukraine?
Well, that's what I want and what we want for sure, Michael. But it's President Zelensky who speaks for the people of Ukraine. And we will always stand with President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine. We will back them to the hilt. And I'm really proud that our party, and indeed our country, cross-party, has been doing that since that appalling invasion by the murderous Vladimir Putin. But let me say a little bit more about this issue, if I may. I am proud that we are the ones who are calling out President Trump. I still find it impossible to believe that a person in the White House is siding with the Kremlin. He uses the propaganda sheets from the Kremlin. It is astonishing. And you remember that moment in the White House where J.D. Vance and Donald Trump ambushed President Zelensky. Wasn't that appalling? Absolutely shocking. And that shows the absolute need for us to call out Trump. And I for the life of me, I can't see why the Conservatives keep failing to do that. And obviously, nobody I reform keeps failing to do that. He thinks Trump is the best thing since sliced bread. But I think the government should be stronger. I think Labour's being too weak on this. So we're going to call out Trump for the sake of Ukraine, for the sake of the brave Ukrainian soldiers and civilians who've paid such a heavy price. And we're not just going to say that. We're going to put forward ideas about how we need to support Ukraine without the US standing up as it used to. We are going to make the case for greater working and cooperation with our European partners. There's no other party that can do that in the way that we can, who can do it credibly. And I'm really pleased that so many of you have been so keen on that. And our call for a European rearmament bank, which has been actually pushed by Liberal Democrats as well as former Chief of Defence Staff. We need to make sure that we are working with our French and German and all our European allies. And also, we've spoken about reimagining and strengthening something called KANZUK, where we work with Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and indeed other Commonwealth countries, but particularly KANZUK, alongside our European colleagues, so we can maximise the strength to support Ukraine. That is what we will continue to do, colleagues.
Thank you very much. So we'll move to the next question. It's a question from Andy Williams. Will the West have to experience fascism once more before it gets rejected again?
Andy, what a frightening thought. The fact you can even say it. I mean, who'd have thought just a few years ago that anyone would be asking that question? It is truly shocking. And I don't know if you're watching, how closely you watch what's happening in America. It is moving from the great democracy that was, with its, flaws, but still fundamentally a great democracy, to an authoritarian state. Before our eyes, in record time. And there was a time when moderate Republicans, not necessarily people sharing all our values, but moderate Republicans would have stood up, would have called it out. But they're just too scared. They're cowering. They saw what happened to Vice President Pence. And they see an occupant of the White House who's ignoring the courts. The courts make a decision, he ignores them. Even Democrats in Congress, I'm sure some of them are speaking up, I'm not hearing reports, but they need to speak louder. We need our friends, our Democrats, and I say that with a small d, in the United States, to show that we can push back against this tide of populism and authoritarianism. And we as Liberals have a huge responsibility, particularly obviously in our own country, but working across Europe too. We shouldn't be complacent about Farage and reform. The things he says, how he divides people. That's what he wants to do, divide people. And that is anathema to us. I'm going to talk a little bit about this in my speech tomorrow. Let's give you a little bit of heads up. But I feel passionately about this, Andy, so I'm really pleased for your question. But essentially, my argument is that we are the antidote to right-wing populism. Liberalism is the antidote. It's the opposite of what people like Trump and Farage and his ilk, whether it's Marine Le Pen or the AfD in Germany or Orban in Hungary, the whole cabal of them. And we have got to do as much as we can. The responsibility on us is greater than I can ever remember it. Because other parties who used to be strong in our country aren't speaking up. The Conservatives are just coward as well. And we have the danger of reform. So we have got a job on our hands, friends. I know we're up for it. I know you're up for it. We have to be the ones pushing back against this populism. So thank you, Andy, for raising it.
Thank you very much, Ed, for that. Next question comes from Lizzie Jukes. It's on a related issue. So Lizzie says, we used to be the party of radical reform, but now Reform UK and the Greens are filling that space. How can we reassert ourselves as the best anti-establishment party?
I hear what Liz is saying, but let's remember the radical nature of reform. They want to lick the boots of Donald Trump. They want Trump America here in the UK. And I think it's our job to point that out to people on the doorstep. Knocking on doors is a way to push back against reform and expose them for what they are. They want to privatise our NHS. They want to basically do Trump's bidding here. So that might sound like a radical agenda, but it's the agenda that Farage isn't telling them. And it's our job, and I hope people in the media will do a little bit more, to help make sure that Nigel Farage is exposed for what he is. He's not a radical reformer. He's betraying what Britain stands for. And are the Greens radical? Well, it's very interesting. We've got this 4 of them in Parliament now, and one of the ones who, I think he's one of the leaders, his first act as a constituency MP was to oppose infrastructure to get renewable energy to people's homes. Well, if that's the radical agenda of the Greens, well, they can keep it. Thank you very much. So, I'm not convinced that they are that radical. But I think Lizzie has a point here. I'm not sure if enough people know that we are a party of change. And I think that is fair behind a question. We've got to try to get that over more. I joined this party because I want to change the system. You know, I want proportional representation. I want to push power down to communities. I want to change the system. That's what makes many of us tick. We're not just about tweaking at the edges. We want to change our system to make it fairer, to make it more democratic, to disperse power. That's who we are. I guess the challenge is, how do you show people that? Because we can say it in interviews, but you know as well as I do that you can say it in 10 interviews and maybe 1 million people hear you, or 2 million, but not everybody does. Well, that's where you come in. Because the way we really do this and show how radical we are is through community politics. Through getting on those doors and talking to people, not just explaining that Nigel Farage cares more about Donald Trump than he does about them, but telling them what we care about. And you know, I might say this in my speech tomorrow, who knows. Did you see that quote from Kemi Badenoch? She was interviewed by a real thought leader, Jordan Peterson. He has one of these podcasts. That was it. I've been ironic there. He's not a thought leader. Well, not liberal thought anyway. Anyway, I digress. Kemi was there and she was being asked about British politics, and she started talking about us. And she said, you know, those Liberal Democrats, all they want to do is fix church roofs. People in the community really like them, she said. But they're not on Twitter. Now, didn't that speak volumes? I think we're going to wear that. We're going to put it on your focuses. You know, the community likes us. We want to fix things for people. And if you do, if you show that you're on people's sides, if you go into their communities, show you care, show you want to get things done, you can rebuild that trust that has been lost. You can show people that actually there is a political party out there who gets them, who understands them, and who wants to work hard for them. And that, in these days, is quite radical, because clearly Kemi Badenoch doesn't want to do it.
Thanks very much. The next question comes from Gabriel Barton-Singer. What's the biggest lesson you've learnt from Kamala Harris's loss to Donald Trump?
Win, I think, is the first lesson. Listen, I don't want to rake over old coals, but I think selecting candidates early is a good thing. I think we can all agree on that. You know, President Biden has to take some of the share of the blame, right? The polls are clear, and candidates need a longer run-in. They just do. So I think that was a big mistake. I think the other thing was, I'd be interested what you think about this. I don't think the Democrats were really listening to voters carefully enough. See, and sometimes we make the same mistake. We think we know what voters care about, and we tell them what we think. Voters decide what an election is about. That's their right, okay, no democracy. You know, we should have all our great policies in our manifesto, but when we campaign, we've got to listen to the voters. And the Democrats didn't do that, in my view. I mean, difficult to say. I wasn't there. Maybe I missed lots of stuff, but from the reports I was reading, and here's a confession, I was pretty obsessive about the American elections, going on lots of websites, and probably I should have been doing something else. But nevertheless, from the impression I had of the American elections, the Democrats were just out of touch in too many areas. And, you know, I'm always careful about being critical about something I haven't run the numbers and done the evidence on, but it did seem to me that they weren't talking about the economy in the way that, in his own horrible way, Trump was talking about the economy. And it looked to me from all the surveys that the economy was the issue. And I was also surprised that they didn't raise the issue of health. The Democrats with Obamacare had a massively good story to tell, which resonated with people, and they weren't telling it. So, you know, just as we found in the general election, health and care and the economy and the cost of living was so important, surprisingly enough, they were the same issues in the United States, and I didn't see the Democrats really addressing either of them in a serious way. Now, they did talk about democracy and threats to democracy, and we're seeing that they were right about that, but that wasn't on the top of voters' minds. And so, you know, I think they could have done a lot better if they'd listened to voters and addressed their concerns.
Thank you very much. So the next question comes from Edward Molyneux, and it is, when the public finances are so tight and benefits are being slashed, is it really a priority for us to protect wealthy farmers from paying inheritance tax?
Well, thank you for that question, Edward. Listen, when you see people like Dyson and Clarkson, you think there are some tax breaks which aren't operating the way they should. Of course we do. But please go and talk to the thousands of farmers who are completely different from the Dysons and Clarksons. Please go and do that. Farms have had to get bigger just to survive, and their returns on quite a lot of capital investment, mainly in the land, their returns are tiny. Some of them, I've met some farmers who look like they're farming quite large farms, but you look at their profit and loss accounts, they're not making a lot of money. It's relatively modest returns from the capital invested. So, you know, I genuinely think that the government have got this wrong, and we need to point that out. And I'm really proud. Tim Farron has been an absolute star in pointing it out from day one. So I'm really proud of Tim. And when you hear Tim speak, he doesn't just talk about the farmers who own their land. He talks about the tenant farmers. The tenant farmers who are going to be thrown off their land if this goes through, because of the way the people who own their land are going to respond to this change. So it's a whole swathe of our farming industry, and given Britain has the best farmers in the world, for Labour to do this damage to them is absolutely a scandal. And you know where it's going to lead? The people who are going to buy this land, they'll be the big corporates, the big multinationals, who find ways to, you know, not even pay any tax at all and put it off in some offshore fund. So what will Labour have achieved? They won't have actually raised much money. They'll have destroyed family farming in our country and, you know, given huge amounts of wealth to big corporations. I don't think that is very clever whatsoever. So we will fight the family farm tax to the end. Labour must change.
Thank you very much. I don't think Ed's here for a supplementary. Okay, so you mentioned the economy in relation to the Harris campaign. So brings me on to a question from Cosmo Lupton, who asks, the biggest problem at the moment is surely the fact that our economy isn't growing. What is our distinctive Lib Dem message on how we get it growing again?
Well, thank you, Cosmo. And full disclosure, Cosmo used to work for me, but I didn't ask him to put this question in. Listen, I hope we've been making it clear. We've called for an emergency growth budget next week in the spring statement, because the huge problem for the public finances, the fact that we're not getting any growth. You know, if you start growing the economy, the borrowing goes down, the tax receipts come in, and you can afford all the spending that we need, whether it's in our health service, whether it's avoiding all this horrible stuff they're doing on benefits. So getting the economy growing is absolutely central. Cosmo asked what's our core message. Well, first of all, we would reverse what Labour has been doing. I've been actually really surprised by Labour's budget policies since the election, given that they talked about growth in the election. And it's not just things like the winter fuel payment and the family farm tax, it was the jobs tax. I mean, a huge mistake, hitting small and medium-sized businesses up and down the country who've traditionally been the engine of growth. Stifling that just doesn't make sense. We know the money needs to be raised, but we showed how it can be raised far more fairly. We've talked about reversing the Conservative cuts to the banks. That would raise £4 billion. We've talked about taxing the social media giants. We've talked about tidying up some of the loopholes for the oil and gas companies, the windfall tax. We've talked about a tax on online gambling. Now, what's common about all those taxes is those sectors are making huge amounts of money, and we're not asking for all of it. We're asking for a little bit. And you know what? It wouldn't affect the vast majority of businesses. That is a better way to raise the money you need without stymieing growth. So that's the first thing. Get rid of the jobs tax. Pay for things we need in a much fairer, more efficient, more growth-friendly way. Second thing, though, and this is should be staring obvious given what Trump is doing with tariffs, we need to have a new customs union with our European partners. The trade deal that the Conservatives did with our European friends was a total economic disaster. I don't know if it was Cosmo, but someone in our amazing research team worked out that if you added up all the forms that have been filled in at the borders to get the trade going between us and Europe, since Brexit, it amounts to 2 billion paper forms. And our press office, in the only way they worked out that means you could go around the circumference of the earth 15 times with Brexit bureaucracy. Apparently you get to the moon 1.5 times with Brexit bureaucracy. And this is nonsense, my friends. And we could get our economy growing really quite quickly if we entered into serious negotiations this year. Now, it may take a little while before you concluded it, but you get benefits straight away. People start investing straight away. Remember, after the referendum vote in 2016, before the Brexit deal was done, investment fell off a cliff because people knew they wouldn't have those exporting opportunities. Let's get it going again. Let's drive the economy by getting that pro-European policy pushed again, and it would start building those relationships back, building trust. Because what's sad is Europeans don't trust us anymore. And, you know, whether it's on defence, where we're beginning to improve those relationships, but on trade, we can completely rebuild them. Now, that is the way to get growth back in our economy.
Thank you very much. And now on to a question from Karen Lindsay. The Liberal Democrats stood fewer women than the Conservative, Labour and Greens at the last general election. How can the leadership improve that?
I refer my honourable friend. It is a serious question. But before I look at the negatives, can I just talk about the positive for a moment? I've been in quite a few parties over the years, and we've never had so many women, and it is fantastic. They are so brilliant. The talent we have is just amazing, and I want you to thank them all and thank all the people who got them elected, because they are brilliant and doing a fantastic job for our party. And parliamentary party debates are quite different from the way they used to be, in a good way, in a very good way. So can we do more? Yes, I'm hoping that the reforms we passed earlier today will be a big part of that. Karen, I know people like you will be a big part of that. Liberal Democrat women will be a big part of that. And we need to work really, really hard, not just on gender equality, of course, but equality of diversity from all sorts of backgrounds.
Thank you very much, and I can see Karen there, so go ahead and ask your supplementary.
Now, I think you might have a little bit of experience of this in your local area, but I'm kind of worried about the falling numbers of women council candidates, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts on where the barriers were and how we could address them.
Well, thank you. The key thing is asking women to stand, right? And beware, because if I get talking to you and you're a woman, I might be asking you to stand quite soon, because I tend to do that quite a lot. And I want you all to do it. I mean, it's a recognised, researched thing that often women need to be asked because they think they can't do it when we know that they can, and often they're far better than the male candidate. So please, please, it's on all of us to do that. Yes, we need to get our structures right, our training right, and it goes back a long way. Let's get personal now, but I'm going to do it anyway. I've confessed before that I met my wife, Emily, on a Liberal Democrat housing policy working group. That was one of the times I met her. Prior to that, I had met her, but I never got to talk to her, and I was quite disappointed about that. I was doing a gig at a friend's house near Euston, the Quaker's house near Euston, and it was a training weekend. I think we're talking about 2001 or something, for women candidates. And she was one of the candidates, and she went on to stand for Parliament and got very close in North Dorset in 2005. But it's those sorts of things that make a difference, Karen. Making sure the party's putting on those training events. And, you know, the gender balance campaign in the party is huge credit. But I think what you're saying is we should not be complacent. We should not think we've sorted the problem out. We haven't. You're right. And we all need to do more on it.
Thank you very much. And we now move to our final question, and that is from Eleanor Kelly. So, Ed Balls recently praised your groove. Would you ever consider following in his footsteps and making an appearance on Strictly?
Thank you, Eleanor. I know Ed Balls quite well, actually. And I'm sure he meant this in a positive way, friendly way. Listen, my team get me to do quite a few things. They often tell me at the last minute, so I can't say no. But they'd have to tell me ahead of time on that one. So I'd have to discuss it with various people. I don't rule anything out, and I don't rule anything in.
So that brings us to the close of the Leaders' Q&A. Please all express your thanks to Ed for answering the questions so well. Thank you very much. Let's say thank you to my aides, Jenny Rigg and Callum Robertson. And we now move to F14, the UK's response to Trump. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Conference. Please take your seats as quickly as you can, as we want to be able to start this debate on time. But while you are taking your seats, I'd like to announce once again that the priorities ballot was won by the international development motion, which is what will be debated at 9 a.m. tomorrow. So, Conference, welcome to F14, policy debate on the UK's response to Trump. The motion starts on page 36 of the agenda on paper or in the app. There are some drafting amendments and 3 moved amendments starting on page 13 of today's Conference Daily. We received 2 separate vote requests but decided not to take them. Will Helen Maguire please stand by? And I now call Callum Miller, our spokesperson for Foreign Affairs, to move the motion.
Good afternoon, Conference. This week, we mourn the death of Group Captain Paddy Hemingway. He was the last Battle of Britain pilot, one of the few who repelled the Luftwaffe assault in the summer of 1940. Despite having to bail 4 times from aircraft, Hemingway fought to the end of the war, receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross. Last month, the UK and France proposed a reassurance force in Ukraine. In response, US Vice President J.D. Vance said that the US taking a stake in Ukrainian minerals would provide more security than, and I quote, 2,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. If Paddy Hemingway's heroism represented the best of Irish and British service and courage, J.D. Vance's comment represents the worst of the vulgarity and ignorance that characterises this White House. What makes the destructive tack taken by Donald Trump and his henchmen so devastating is that the last 80 years have seen the UK and US enjoy one of the closest alliances in history. We've had our ups and downs, and our party has not been as starry-eyed as some. Yet across business, culture, science, and especially defence, we have stood together. So the shock that so many have felt about Trump's approach to foreign policy is because this feels like the rupture of a relationship. Our US friends have been family. Under Donald Trump, the family is being torn apart. In the face of this assault on the alliances and institutions that have kept the UK safe, Liberal Democrats have turned to our liberal values. A belief in the better instincts of humankind. A commitment to democracy and the rule of law as the best ways to constrain the powerful and protect the weak. And a conviction that problems are better solved together alongside our partners. As we face the rising tide of authoritarianism and nationalism, we need more liberalism, not less. And it must be self-confident, robust liberalism. We must meet strength with strength while resolutely rejecting the logic that might equals right. And so, Conference, it's my privilege to propose this motion. Every day in the last 2 months, we've been responding in Parliament to the challenges of the Trump presidency. We have given strong, liberal answers to the key questions on defence and security. This is now your chance to debate them, and I hope to endorse them as policy. In the space of just 2 months, Donald Trump has deeply undermined the foundations of the liberal, rules-based order. He actively damaged Ukraine's defence against Russia by blocking military aid and intelligence sharing with Kyiv. He voted at the UN with Putin, alongside North Korea and Belarus, not to condemn Russia for the brutal war in Ukraine. Together with his sidekick, J.D. Vance, he ambushed President Zelensky at the White House, the most shameful event to have ever taken place in the Oval Office. He cast doubt on US support to NATO allies in the event of an external attack, while threatening to take Greenland, the territory of another NATO state, with force. And beyond Ukraine, he has casually advocated for the violation of international law with his extraordinary advocacy for expelling Palestinians to build a Gaza Riviera. Trump has shown that he does not respect international law or institutions and is not a reliable partner in the defence of Ukraine or in Europe's wider collective security. And that is why it is vital that the UK work urgently with our partners, starting with Europe and the Commonwealth, to reduce our strategic reliance on the US. By working with constant allies, we will be stronger in dealing with an unpredictable White House and a menacing Kremlin. Conference, if passed, this motion would allow us to provide Ukraine with the support it immediately needs, whilst also strengthening the UK's longer-term security. This motion would allow us to provide more support to Ukraine by making Russia pay through seizing the £25 billion of frozen Russian assets locked away across the UK and deploying them to support Ukraine, and by reversing the staggeringly irresponsible 10,000 troop cuts made by the Conservatives, so we're in a much better place to contribute effectively to collective security in Europe. This motion would also allow us to strengthen the UK's longer-term security by expanding our security cooperation with partners across Europe, including through the Joint Expeditionary Force and with EU security and intelligence agencies, and by insulating ourselves from Trump's irrational tariff wars by deepening our economic ties with Europe, healing the damage done by the Conservatives' botched Brexit deal. I'm grateful to the movers of the 3 excellent amendments to the motion, each of which I would urge conference to support. The first amendment would commit us to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence as soon as possible, hold cross-party talks to agree a way forward to spending 3% of GDP, and support the development of a new rearmament bank with our European allies to generate new finance for defence programmes. Unlike Labour, we would fully fund this defence spending increase by raising the digital services tax from 2% to 10% for the biggest social media and tech firms, not by cutting international aid and the UK's vital soft power. That is a strategic error and it is wrong. The second amendment would commit us to a new UK-EU customs union by 2030. This would unlock the growth which Labour has failed to deliver, deepen our economic ties with Europe and strengthen our resilience in the face of Trump's damaging tariff threats. The third amendment would ensure that there will be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine. Conference, I have so much respect for the 8 of our 72 MPs who have served in our armed forces. For the many who have been hurt by Trump's casual disloyalty, they have spoken powerfully of the dishonour he and JD Vance have shown. We owe it to the service and sacrifice of generations of military personnel, back to Patty Hemingway and beyond, to defend and promote our liberal values. The Liberal Democrats are the only party who will stand up to Trump and take steps to strengthen the UK in the face of his belligerent bullying. The Trump fan club in Reform and the Conservative Party won't do it. Labour won't do it. They said they would reset the relationship with Europe, but they have wasted critical months and have now swallowed their criticism of Trump. Let's back this motion, Conference, and let's send a clear message that it's only the Liberal Democrats who will stand up to Trump, invest in the UK's security, support Ukraine, hold back Russia, deepen our ties with European and Commonwealth partners, and stand up for liberal British values.
Thank you, Callum. Will James McCleary please stand by? And I now call Helen Maguire, MP for Epsom and Ewell and our Defence spokesperson, to move Amendment 1.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Conference, and thank you, Colin. I'm delighted to be making my first address to Conference as the party's Defence spokesperson. It is no exaggeration, Conference, to say that Britain faces the most severe threats to our security since the end of the Cold War. With Putin continuing his barbaric invasion of Ukraine, authoritarian states eroding the rules-based order and Trump showing himself to be an unreliable partner, it is vital that the UK steps up on defence. That's why I'm pleased to be moving this amendment, which would cement our position as the party leading on defence. It intends to achieve 3 things. 1, to embed a commitment to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence as soon as possible and to fund this without cutting international aid. 2, to strengthen our call for cross-party talks to agree on how to reach 3% of GDP on defence. 3, to commit us to working with our European partners to set up a new rearmament bank. Given the scale of the challenges facing us, Conference, it is only right that we move further and faster on ramping up defence spending. It is vital that we commit to reaching 2.5% GDP on defence as soon as possible, and faster than the government's proposed timeline of April 2027. This would allow us to reverse cuts made to the army under the Conservatives, who took the shameful decision to slash troop numbers by 10,000, even as war raged on our continent. The amendment also sets out our proposal to fund the increase to 2.5% by raising the digital service tax from 2 to 10%, impacting the largest social media and tech companies. This would generate funding in a way which does not undermine the UK's vital soft power, unlike the government's plans to slash the aid budget. Labour are not moving fast enough on defence spending and are making cuts which will undermine the UK's security at home and soft power abroad. The Conservatives, meanwhile, have shattered any claims that they are the party of defence through their disastrous management of our armed forces while in government. The Liberal Democrats understand the gravity of the security challenges we face. Several of my colleagues, including myself, have served in our armed forces and seen firsthand the sacrifices that our incredible service personnel make to defend this country. We're the only party that will invest properly in our military and lead on defence. This also means strengthening engagement with our European partners. As Europe looks set to begin a once-in-a-generation drive for rearmament, the UK should be at the heart of that process. That's why I believe a commitment to a rearmament bank is so important. It would allow us to access more finance for defence programmes, boosting jobs at home and helping us to meet our security commitments, while also expanding defence cooperation with our continental allies. Conference, I encourage you to support this amendment. It will strengthen our work to reduce the UK's strategic reliance on the US, meet our commitments to Ukraine and enhance our collective security in the face of Putin's barbarism. It will confirm what to many is already clear, that the Liberal Democrats are the party of defence.
Thank you, Helen. Will Samuel Jackson please stand by? And I now call James McCleary MP for Lewis and our Europe spokesperson to move Amendment 2.
Good afternoon, Conference, and thank you to Callum and to Helen for both the motion and the amendment so far. At the beginning of this week, I was in Brussels as part of the UK delegation to the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. The PPA was established as part of the Brexit arrangements to provide democratic oversight for the withdrawal agreement. At the Assembly, I spoke about the urgent need for a youth mobility scheme, a defence pact, and a new customs union with the European Union. Ambitious ideas that stood in marked contrast to Labour MPs, who, while seeming to agree with most, if not all of that, are so tightly wrapped up in their pre-election red lines that they were forced to continue trotting out empty rhetoric about resets and ruthless pragmatism, whatever that is. For 5 years now, we've lived with the consequences of the Conservatives' botched Brexit deal and the disintegration of economic ties with our closest and most important trading partners. We've seen the impact up and down our country. Mountains of red tape for businesses, declining exports to Europe, and the disintegration of economic ties as small and medium businesses struggle to even survive. But if ignoring the damage the deal was a luxury that Labour in particular felt they could afford before, now the situation has changed. Driven by the return of Donald Trump to the White House, Trump has already hit the UK with new tariffs on steel and aluminium, with plans for even harsher levies earmarked for the 2nd of April, just days from now. Meanwhile, the growing danger of stagflation at home threatens to wipe out any prospects of economic growth. As we face these twin threats, we also need to give the economy the boost it needs to generate jobs, encourage investment and rebuild trust in British business. That's why, Conference, I am delighted to propose this amendment to this excellent motion, which, if passed, would commit the UK to securing a new customs union agreement with the EU by 2030 at the latest. A new customs union would reduce the need for significant checks and controls on goods, cutting red tape currently holding British businesses back, most importantly on rules of origin. I'm immensely proud that our leader, Ed Davey, took a stance on a new customs union earlier this year, positioning the Liberal Democrats as the only party championing genuine opportunities for economic growth, which will bolster our resilience in the face of Trump's anti-trade, pro-tariff agenda. As part of our roadmap for Europe, we have already been working hard to pressure the government on strengthening ties with our European friends. This has included pushing for an agreement on a reciprocal youth mobility scheme, which would restore to our young people the opportunities to live, work and travel across Europe, while boosting British employers by helping them recruit the workers they need, a clear win-win for the UK and Europe. I warmly recommend this amendment to Conference. A new UK-EU customs union is both a plan to deal with Trump and to grow our economy. And how urgently do we need to do both?
Thank you, James. Will Andrew Hudson please stand by? And I now call Samuel Jackson from Calderdale to propose Amendment 3.
Good afternoon, Conference. Today marks 1,122 days since the start of Russia's illegal and unjustifiable war against Ukraine. In that time, Ukraine has witnessed the deaths of upwards of 80,000 of her service members and over 12,000 of her civilians, as well as over 170 billion euros worth of damage inflicted upon her. Despite all that, the nation has fought determinedly to maintain her national sovereignty and dignity and to restore her territorial integrity. It is disheartening that Ukraine's fate rests in the hands of Donald Trump. As a Republican, a member of the party of Ronald Reagan, he should have found a natural ally in Volodymyr Zelensky, an actor turned politician who is fighting steadfast for his nation's freedoms against Russia. But no, Donald Trump has shown greater camaraderie with Vladimir Putin, an authoritarian strongman seeking to subjugate a free nation through military force in order to bolster the power and prestige of the country that he rules to the detriment of its citizens. Ukraine simply does not have a champion in Donald Trump. He has berated them for not accepting unfavourable peace terms, and he has attempted to coerce them into signing over their mineral rights. With Ukraine kept at an arm's length away from US-Russian peace talks, there is every fear that Ukraine will be press-ganged into a peace deal in which she had no say and which will effectively punish her whilst rewarding Vladimir Putin. With Yorkshire and Humber's amendment to F14, we would urge the UK government to continue our country's long-standing support for Ukraine by ensuring that they get a fully participatory and equal role in the peace talks meant to bring about an end to the conflict inflicted upon their country. Ukraine's status as a free and sovereign nation has always been in jeopardy throughout the fighting. And that status needs to be recognised, reaffirmed and exercised in bringing about a just and stable peace. Conference, it is for those reasons why I urge you to support Amendment 3 to F14. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Will Sean MacLeod please stand by? And I now call Andrew Hudson from Westmoreland, Furness and Eden to speak against the motion as a whole.
All right, now I agree with the sentiments behind the motion, being a supporter of the son of Incretin, but apart from anything else, it keeps getting overtaken by events. Although the proposed amendments to the second part have gone some way to bring it up to date. The second part, if amended, is less problematic. It takes into account the situation arising from the incumbent in the White House, but it needs a bit more thought, particularly with the fluidity of the situation. Should we, for instance, call for a prohibition on Elon Musk entering the country after his threats of civil war? I also query why certain MPs are using X on their website as a form of communication. A reference back would still face the same problems as events move quickly. The first part is argued out of date. It doesn't go far enough, given the events since the closing date for motions, which a drafting amendment brings reference to JD Vance, but not the threat to the judiciary. In fact, I'm not sure also the Republican Party policies are the problem so much as the failure to stand up to Trump. It is Trump that is the Republican in name only, and he's certainly not a Conservative, which is going to, and the Republicans will have to start challenging them before he destroys the Republicans. Ironically, the best hope in the short term lies with them. The biggest criticism is they aren't challenging Trump, who's certainly come a long way from the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln. The one thing America won't do is make America great again. It was the exact opposite to the American firsters that did make America the dominant world power under Roosevelt. Also, the Supreme Court, thankfully, is starting to act as a check on the policies, although it's been packed with Trump's own nominees. It is, hopefully, developing a life of its own, as Eisenhower found out under Earl Warren. Governments, I accept, have to use more diplomatic language. I would go further than the movers in another thing, in that I would query the patriotism of some of the voices on the right who are apologists for Trump, such as the Honourable Member for Washington, I think you all know who I'm referring to, a term once applied to John Bright, who at least had onward intentions in support for President Lincoln. The snivelling cretin, which the term shouldn't be used, has already made it quite clear where we stand. So that's where he got the term to the Trump administration. And that we're the only mainstream party that's prepared to stand up to Trump. In a way, it makes the motion superfluous. It is also, again, out of date. Should we really be wasting our time discussing this when there's more pressing issues? In fact, the fact we're discussing one individual, shows the effect Trump is having on the political process in other countries. It's time, let's say, we've stopped letting him set the agenda.
Thank you, Andrew. Will Abriel Joram please stand by? And I now call Sean MacLeod from East Hampshire, who is speaking for the motion as a whole.
Good afternoon, everybody. I strongly support this motion and the cross-party backing for robust principled support for Ukraine and for allies like Canada unexpectedly finding themselves in the White House sights. It is truly shocking to see moves that undermine basic tenets of international law and are profoundly anti-democratic being made by and on behalf of an American president. To highlight just a few, the cessation of US military aid and intelligence support to Ukraine, the summary closure of USAID and cancellation of significant assistance to people in need in Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza and elsewhere, the ending of support to Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia and Voice of America. The motion's drafters have had their work cut out trying to keep up with rapidly moving events. I commend their efforts, whilst noting that increased space for Chinese influence in the Global South is only one of many potential consequences of such decisions. It is certainly not the United States nor the American people that stand to benefit from the unravelling of the achievements of previous presidents and generations of lawmakers, military personnel, diplomats and other American citizens. The best way for President Trump to refute accusations that he is operating in the interests of Vladimir Putin would be to reinstate support for respected institutions like Radio Free Europe and to demonstrate commitment to helping Ukraine defend itself and to defending its interests. I particularly endorse the third proposed amendment today. Ukraine is a sovereign nation with a legal and moral right to be central to negotiations affecting its future. Until just a few weeks ago, this principle would have had no stauncher defender than the American administration. I have focused on US foreign policy, but today we should also think about the many people losing their livelihoods, fearing loss of academic or artistic freedom, being confronted with instructions they believe to be immoral, or bravely challenging actions they know to be illegal. It is right that I believe that the UK should make every effort to act as a positive influence on the Trump administration. But we must also make clear an unwavering support for Americans working to keep alive the spirit of freedom and democracy for a future beyond Trump. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Will Jacqueline Denny please stand by? And I now call Abriel Joram from Durham, who is speaking against lines 7 to 8 of Amendment 1.
Conference. I'd like to support Amendment 1 there, but there are two very simple reasons why I can't. Firstly, it doesn't stand up to the most basic of scrutiny. Let me take you through the numbers. Currently, according to the House of Commons Library, the GDP of the UK is 2.848 trillion. 2.5% of that is 71 billion. Our current defence spending, also according to House of Commons Library, is 56.9 billion. That means we need about 14 billion more per year in defence spending to get to 2.5. So, we plan to do that by increasing the digital service tax fivefold. Most recently, in the most recent data I can find, in 2023, the digital service tax brought in revenue 670 million. Multiply that 5, you get 3.35 billion. That is, anyone knows that's nowhere near the 14 billion it would take to get spending up to 2.5%. There are some estimates, to be charitable, which said that the digital service tax might get up to bring in 1 billion a year. Times that by 5, you get 5 billion. Still nowhere near the 14. There's another reason I cannot support it. Conference, Daisy's sitting right here in front of me, but conference, I'd like you to turn your mind back 3 conferences ago, I think, when Daisy got up here on the stage in Bournemouth, and said that we will increase digital service tax to pay for our mental health services, partly because social medias are causing a decline in mental health, and they should pay somewhat to repair the damages of that. Callum was right when he said it was wrong to fund our increase on defence on the backs of the most vulnerable. Conference, our MPs have been brave. Should we tell them that, thank you for that, let's go and focus on another group by undermining all of the Lib Dems plans that they have to help people who struggle with their mental health? So those are the 2 reasons I can't support this motion. 1, it does exactly what we have tried to avoid by increasing defence spending on the backs of the vulnerable. And 2, we're doing it for a motion that clearly just can't stand up to the most basic of scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. So will Leon Devine please stand by? And I now call Jacqueline Denny from Hammersmith and Fulham to speak for the motion.
Hello, everyone. I'm a British citizen and an immigrant from the US, and I'm speaking on support of the full motion. I also view the proposed moves as, so many slings and arrows against Farage and reform, and I really support that. 2 birds, 1 stone, government efficiency, hey. So as someone whose entire family still lives in the US, I have a lot of skin in this particular game. I grew up also hearing all about the separation of powers in the US and how it was so cleverly designed to be a bulwark against dictators and runaway power. And yet, within 3 months, a clearly unintelligible, inartful buffoon is dismantling it right in front of our eyes. So the strength that we thought we had is not so strong after all. It's a common phrase that the US sneezes and the world catches a cold. So when we have people like Trump holding that tissue box and threatening to also withhold that, we're in for a heck of a cold season. And that's to say nothing about the measles, polio, bird flu, tuberculosis that they're incubating over there now. So the UK is a proud and mighty country with centuries of fascinating history, and I've personally invested a lot of my time and effort to be here. So I say this with my full heart, this is a country I do love. And I'm not doing this as a nod to nationalism, but really a hat tip to the country before I say this. It is a small country, and we need herd immunity now from whatever it is that Trump is cooking up. We need more strength, more alliances if we are to get through this. We need to strengthen our shared values with our friends in the EU, while also increasing our defensive capabilities in-house. We need a show of strength, as this is the only form of communication that Trump understands. But we can craft a beneficent strength, which is the language that we know. At the same time, we need heart. Whether it's Ukraine and Palestine or other countries such as Yemen and Sudan, how can we stand by and continue to support further destruction and or death in those regions, whether it's wars, climate change-related devastation? We live in a globalized economy, and as a purported wealthy country, we have a moral and strategic responsibility to support the oppressed, the invaded, the innocent. Under Trump, so many of the core values that we hold are labeled as woke and smacked on the behind as they're thrown in the fire pit. We need to stand up now. We cannot stand by. And none of this would be possible if we let corporations influence in elections, like we're seeing with the kind of parasitic behavior with Trump and Elon. Now is the time to act, and I urge you to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Jacqueline was a first-time speaker. Will Noel Hadji-Michael stand by? And I now call Leon Devine of Bassett Law, who is speaking against lines 71 to 74.
Conference. There is much to support in this motion. Trump may be a 4-year anomaly as president, and in 2029, a new US president will be there to try and mend the broken bridges with Europe, with Canada, and the rest of the democratic world. But there may not be. Trump may be replaced by the likes of J.D. Vance or one of the Trump offspring, trying to continue the isolationist policies we have seen since January the 20th. We must prepare for a world, and for Europe, where the USA is no longer active in defending democracy. However, the lines in the motion about maintaining what is called the UK nuclear deterrent are misplaced in this motion. I proposed an amendment to remove them, but I was told this is not the occasion for debate on nuclear weapons. But if that's the case, why include those lines? The reason why they are misplaced is that if we are to have a defence policy that isn't relying on Trump's America, then we need to be honest enough to say that our nuclear deterrent is based on Trident missiles leased from and maintained by the USA. Missiles that have failed spectacularly on 2 of the most recent tests. That deterrent cannot be part of that defence policy. If we are to stand with our European allies without the backing of the USA, these missiles are worse than useless, because they eat up 6% of our defence budget, £3 billion annually, money that could be far better spent on building up UK's stockpile of conventional defence equipment, which has been run down to dangerous levels. And this is even before we start looking at the costs of the new Dreadnought submarines, which will also use US missiles, currently budgeted at £41 million, but is bound to rise. The threat to Europe is now. We need soldiers, sailors, airmen now. We need the right equipment in place now. We need to be able to deter military aggression. We need to be able to boost the cyber defence to stop bots interfering with our vital infrastructure, elections and media. We need to boost overseas aid, which I'm very glad to see is in one of the amendments, and to wield soft power in developing nations. We do not need to be spending money on a nuclear deterrent we do not fully control, we are not sure will work, and would probably not deter a tyrant like Putin, who seems quite glad to sacrifice many of his own people to achieve his ends. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leon. Will Jamie Little please stand by? I now call Noel Hadji-Michael from Kingston Borough, who is Chair of Lib Dem Friends of the Armed Forces and is speaking for Amendment 1.
Thank you very much. I didn't prepare a speech today because 45 years ago I joined up as a 16-year-old to serve in the Royal Australian Navy. You do some things when you're young, sometimes you regret them, sometimes you don't. The most important thing about this motion is that it has been the work of many rather than the few. Parliamentarians, people who have skin in the game, people who are subject matter experts, but many others, from the original motion to the group of amendments before you, which I all support, for the simple reason that it is a response to President Trump. We have a long tradition of having a strong and robust relationship with the United States. Yes, they may be cousins to some. We have family that are even closer, and that's why what's happened to Canada means so much to so many of us in this room. But as Liberals, who are practical, who are progressive, and who are deeply patriotic, this is the balance. This is the strength that we need. We have details in the original motion and in the amendments that deal with all of the strongest headaches we face. It has been a shocking time since the President took office for the second time, but this is not an anti-American motion. This is not a motion against one of our strongest and most dear relationships, people to people. We are Liberals because we believe in the Atlantic Charter from the 1940s. We are Liberals because we stood up with Social Democrats and Conservatives in the Cold War. We are Liberals that should vote overwhelmingly in favour of the motion, in favour of the amendments, send a message to the administration, but importantly, send a message to the American people. We are their good friend, but we are their critical friend, and we are putting the interests of the United Kingdom first. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noel. Will David Chalmers please stand by? And I now call Janie Little, who's Vice Chair of Lib Dem Women, to speak for parts of the drafting amendment.
I'm speaking today on behalf of Lib Dem Women, the official body in the party representing women. Women's fundamental rights across the globe are under threat, but this motion only mentions women in one line, and abortion is not mentioned at all, and this is not good enough. In 2021, the day after Texas banned abortions from as early as 6 weeks, Jocelyn Barnica went to hospital with cramps. She returned a day later, and it was clear that she was going to have a miscarriage that would put her at risk of an infection. But because of the abortion ban in Texas, doctors could not intervene until the fetus no longer had a heartbeat. Only after a heartbeat could no longer be detected did the doctor treat the miscarriage. But it was too late. Jocelyn Barnica died within days, and numerous medical experts said that this was preventable. On June the 24th, 2022, the US Supreme Court justices overturned Roe v. Wade, taking away the constitutional right to abortion. Trump appointed the justices who casted the deciding votes. Now, millions and millions of women in the US are affected by total abortion bans. It is a dark time for women across the globe, and it is in no small part due to the actions of the previous and the current Trump administrations. On the 24th of January this year, Trump reinstated the global gag rule, which prevents NGOs who provide abortion services or who advocate for abortion rights from receiving aid from the US. Billions of dollars of foreign aid are affected by this, and 690 million women of reproductive age live in countries that are impacted by the global gag rule. This will lead to more unintended pregnancies, unsafe abortions, reduced access to contraception, and maternal deaths. So we as Lib Dem Women think that this motion should have included a full condemnation of the withdrawal of the right to choose for American women. Reform are now calling for abortion rights to be debated in the UK, so this is very much on our doorstep as well. And as we've heard earlier today, women made up just 28% of Lib Dem candidates in the last general election, and young women in particular are really severely underrepresented in the party. We have to do better. It is for the good of the party, but it is also fundamentally the right thing to do. Regardless, please vote for the motion, but we hope to see more on women's rights in this space in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. Will Baroness Smith please stand by? And I now call David Chalmers, who's the Chair of the Federal International Relations Committee, who will be speaking for parts of the drafting amendment.
Good afternoon, Conference. This motion addresses the most critical international issue of our times: how to deal with the Trump second presidency and the unprecedented situation where our once-time closest ally, the USA, has not just become unreliable, but is now actually aligned with Vladimir Putin's Russia, whilst threatening the territorial sovereignty of NATO allies Canada and Denmark. FERC has debated and endorsed this motion and submitted drafting amendments, and, as others have mentioned, will advise as the situation evolves. Much of our focus is rightly on the security and international implications of the Trump presidency, but we must not forget what is happening inside the US itself. Attacks to undermine the justice system, the very constitutional basis of the Republic, gutting the Justice Department, threatening to impeach judges, imprison their political opponents, and attack human rights. And it is the treatment of LGBT people, and in particular trans people, that as Liberals should most concern us. On day one, Trump issued an executive order only recognising two sexes, male and female, with all the legal implications. Trans women who have lived many years as women are most at risk, with several already having their passports stamped M to denote male their sex at birth. As trans women are now legally designated as men, they risk falling foul of laws in some states that, as they leave their homes, prohibit men from wearing women's clothes in public. Many LGBT US citizens, out of fear, are considering seeking refuge in this country. And British citizens, especially trans people, are in danger of visiting the USA. We have evidence of at least 3 Germans recently arrested. The French academic turned away at the border because of social media containing criticism of Trump. Several governments, including Germany, have already warned their citizens against visiting. And the cuts to US aid will impact some of the most vulnerable people around the world, only exacerbated by the short-sighted cuts to the UK's international aid budget. In particular, NGOs serving LGBT groups for women's reproductive rights and those empowering democracy and fighting AIDS have seen drastic cuts in their funding. I would also like to specifically speak for Amendment 3, which is fully endorsed by FERC, calling for a UK customs union as the most logical and achievable next step in our roadmap to develop a closer relationship with the EU, that improve productivity and bring the much-needed wealth to our nation. We know from our sister parties that along with the Youth Mobility Scheme and closer cooperation in defence and security, these steps will be welcomed and most easily accepted by the EU and its member states. LGBT campaigners in the US and senior several Democrat politicians have asked me to express their thanks to our party for caring about what is happening to their country. Please support this motion and Amendments 1, 2 and 3 and send a clear message to Trump and to JD Vance. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Now, nobody has spoken against Amendments 2 and 3, so I'll ask Daisy Cooper to stand by, and I now call Baroness Smith of Newham, our Lord Spokesperson on Defence, to summate for Amendment 1.
Thank you. Slight amendment. I'm actually Smith of Newnham, not Newham. So anyone who is from Newham and wonders why you never see me in Newham, it's because actually I don't have any links with Newham. But I'd be very happy to come and visit. Fellow Liberal Democrats, Amendment 1 seeks to address something that matters fundamentally, ensuring that our defence expenditure is sufficient or moving in the right direction. His Majesty's government has made some of the right noises, but isn't going far enough and isn't going fast enough. Andrew Hudson said this motion wasn't needed or wasn't the right motion because we were running too slowly, we were being overtaken by events. And there is a real danger of that because since the 20th of January, it seems that every day there has been a new executive order. And just this week, Donald Trump talked about the new fighter jet, the 6th generation, the F-47. And he said that that fighter jet was going to be one that they're all asking for, all the allies are interested in. And he said, well, we might give it to them, but we'll tone it down or sell it to them, obviously, because maybe one day they won't be our allies, right? So that is why Amendment 1 and this motion are so important. But Abril Jaram tried to hold us to account, rightly so, to say we hadn't got the numbers right. So I have got some detailed numbers, not from the House of Commons. The proposal comes on the basis of numbers from the Office of Budgetary Responsibility. So forgive me, I'm going to be looking down and being very boring and detailed. The current, to raise expenditure to 2.5% of GDP by 29-30 would be about £5.2 billion a year. At that point, having the digital tax at 10% would be raising £4.1 billion a year. There is a gap of about £1 billion. That's all at 2024-25 prices. And the difference of £1.1 billion would be from capital expenditure, capital costs which have already been raised. So, raised by the party. So we believe that the numbers do work, and on that basis, I would very much urge people to vote for Amendment 1 and vote for the motion as amended, as I hope you will, because it really matters that our country is able to speak up for defence, stand up for Ukraine, and make sure that even if the United States has become an unreliable partner, we are safe and secure, and so are our partners and allies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Finally, I'd like to call Daisy Cooper, MP for St Albans and the Deputy Leader of the party, who will be summating for the motion as a whole.
Thank you, Conference, and thank you for those fantastic speeches and a wonderful debate, and a debate that makes me feel proud once again to be a Liberal Democrat. Callum started the debate by comparing the heroism of the Battle of Britain pilot John Paddy Hemingway and comparing that with the vulgarity of J.D. Vance. Helen, Julie and Noel talked to Amendment 1 to highlight that we are now facing some of the biggest threats since the Second World War and the importance of spending more on defence, not by cutting international aid, but increasing digital services taxes and putting our full backing behind the idea of a rearmament bank, which will help leverage private sector investment. Noel as well reminded us of the importance of those personal connections that underpin our military alliances, particularly for those serving in the armed forces. On Amendment 2, James reminded us about the impact of the disintegration of our relations with our European allies and the impact of Trump's tariffs that are already being wielded on our steel and aluminium sectors. He highlighted the importance of boosting our UK economy with a bespoke customs union and the importance of a youth mobility scheme as well. On Amendment 3, Samuel reminded us of the damage that is being inflicted on Ukraine and the devastating loss of life. I believe fundamentally in what Amendment 3 says. There should be no discussion about Ukraine without Ukraine at the table. Jacqueline and Sean talked about solidarity with Canada and the rising threat from China and the damage of cutting international aid. Leon, although disagreeing with some of the lines, did highlight the very important issue about protecting from electoral interference and protecting our continued strength through soft power. Janie, you spoke very powerfully about the abortion ban and the impact that is having on women in the States. Whilst abortion itself is a conscience issue in the UK Parliament, I can give you my personal firm commitment that we as a parliamentary party will continue to champion the rights of women here in the UK and abroad. Gabriel challenged me on the costings, and Julie has given a firm rebuttal. But let me just say that we will absolutely not make this a choice between defending our nation and defending the mental and physical health of people in this country. Health and wealth are two sides of the same coin, and that is why we are determined to continue to grow our economy, including by having a UK-EU customs union that will give us the growth to raise the money to pay for the public services and get them back on their feet. And David reminded us that this is not just about a military fight. He highlighted the threats to the judiciary and the justice system in the US as well. Conference. Whether it is on the economy or defence, Trump has shown himself to be unreliable and unpredictable. It is vital that we reduce our strategic reliance on the US. And as the threats that we face continue to grow, the UK must move closer to those partners that we know we can trust. If we pass this motion together with all of the amendments, the motion will cement the idea that we Liberal Democrats are the party leading on questions of national defence and security, advocating opportunities for our economy and future-proofing it against Trump's irrational anti-trade policies, and standing up for Ukraine in the face of attempts by Trump and Putin to carve it up. Conferences has been a fantastic debate, a wonderful reminder of why I am a Liberal Democrat. I am grateful to Callum, James, Helen and the team for showing extraordinary leadership and standing up for the Liberal values in which we all believe. Please vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. So we now move to a series of 4 votes on this motion, the first 3 of which are already open online. So if you get your passes ready to vote, can I see all those in favour of Amendment 1? Thank you. And can I see those against Amendment 1? What tiny number? Yep, and it's there's only 1 against online, so that is very clearly carried. Can I now see those in favour of Amendment 2? Thank you. And can I see those against Amendment 2? Yeah, again, very clearly carried both here and online. And can I see those in favour of Amendment 3? Thank you. And can I see those against Amendment 3? Not sure I can see anybody. Yeah, so that was NEMCON online as well. So, yes, Amendment 3 very clearly carried. So the vote on the substantive is now open online. And can I see all those in favour of the motion as amended by all 3 amendments? Thank you. And can I see those against? Again, I'm struggling to see anyone against. Sure, there's somebody somewhere, but I can't see any. We do have 1 against online. Yeah, but yeah, it's very, very, very clearly carried. So thank you to my aides. Thank you to my aides, Hannah Kitching and Lord Mohammed, and to all the speakers in this fantastic debate, as Daisy said, very passionate debate, and to the very many members who submitted cards that we did not have time to call. So I now hand over to Chris Mains, who will chair item F15.